Holy One, I pray that you once again bless the words of my mouth, the meditation of all our collective hearts as we come together this Sunday. O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I love Lent. And I've spent time in New Orleans, post-Katrina, rebuilding restaurants. And I love that Ash Wednesday is this kind of proverbial kick in the pants for a city known for drunkenness and sinfulness and debauchery and eating and music and all the things. In fact, Tuesday, all bets are off, right? It's parades and nakedness and eating everything in sight, public displays of all the things, right? Come Wednesday, though, we get our collective physical and spiritual nonsense together. It's a way to support one another. Let's go back to the scripture that Hugh read. As the 40-day season of Lent begins, we turn to Luke's account of Jesus's 40-day temptation in the wilderness, the literal wilderness in the biblical sense. Just prior to the launch of his public ministry, the word Lent comes from this Old English word to lengthen and refers to the gradual lengthening of days of late winter and early spring in the northern hemisphere, at least. Over the centuries, Lent evolved into this 40-day period. We're not talking about Sunday, it's the 40 days in between of preparation for Holy Week, Easter Sunday. Back to manuscripts, I'm not reading it on a screen. To get back into the practice of this, right? There's a metaphor here, being in the practice of things. In the ancient biblical imagination, 40 has some things we can learn from. Both it's a spiritual or shorthand way of saying for a long time. When they would say 40, it's just a long time, right? And a way of resonating with other key 40s. In Israel's sacred memory, the flood, right? It was 40 days of rain in Genesis. Moses went up the mountain, right? For 40 days without food on Mount Sinai. In Exodus, Elijah also went without food for 40 days as he journeyed to Mount Horeb. Israel's 40 years of wilderness wandering in Deuteronomy. And then here we eventually arrive with Jesus in his very own wilderness experience, lasting for how long? 40 days, right? And I don't know how many of you, it's, looking out right now, it's hard to imagine that we had a flourishing youth group, right? But I'm sure we did at some point, right? Did you ever do those fasts with the kids, right? I remember as a youth, we did these fasts, right? And we would end with like a spaghetti feed because it was cheap, right? You could do this big, giant spaghetti feed for pennies on the dollar, right? We didn't do 40 hours. We would do one overnight because 40 hours would be a really long time. But 40 days without food, can you imagine? And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, when everyone was rushing out, when we were at lockdown, we ran out and bought rice and beans and all these things because we didn't know what was going to happen. But God is kind of this master weaver or poet, threading this loom and poetry through time and space, intricately connecting these stories of past, present, and future, right? As we sit here in our contemporary time and space, even our liturgical calendar has connected things for us, becoming one with the biblical narrative, because now we sit in our own wilderness experience. We too receive this kind of engraved invitation to step into Jesus's wilderness experience to take our own 40-day pilgrimage towards a hopeful, holy week, a holy experience. Just an aside, I had a bit of a conversation with God this past week. I voted to decline the wilderness experience this year. I said I've had enough. And I got a memo that it doesn't work that way by all indications. Seemed to say that I couldn't just cancel war or pandemics by just saying we're done. It doesn't work like that. I said I'd ask to speak to the manager. That too doesn't work, I guess. Yeah, sorry guys. But the temptation, which is what this text really focuses on, Jesus' temptation, right? To what? To opt out, right? To say, I've had enough. I'm done with this experience. I'm done with the wilderness. I'm done with being human and hungering and starving and suffering. And I'm going to pose that it offers us 3 questions, but I, dig in and it probably offers us a whole lot more than that. Who do you trust for nourishment? Who do you trust with your service? And whom do you trust to love and care for you? And again, dig in, you're going to say, Pastor Monica, there's a whole lot more going on here, but Debbie's recording, it goes on YouTube, and I don't get to talk that long. And I think these are 3 questions wrapped up in one ultimate answer. And as Jesus was in the wilderness, the text says he was famished. And again, I wouldn't make it 40 hours, much less 40 days, much less those folks who lasted 40 years, so I don't even understand half of this. But how many of you have gone grocery shopping when you're hungry? Right, it's dumb. Don't do it. Go stop and get like a $1 menu item first, which is just, usually it's in the same vicinity, right? You can just go through the drive-through. We pass the drive-through and we still go grocery shopping. I am not one to send to the store when I'm hungry. I come home with the most ridiculous stuff I would never buy. This wasn't a test of willpower, right? For Jesus, it was a test of reliance on God, because we know 2 things, right? He's fully human and he's fully divine, right? So the devil was attempting to drive a wedge between Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit, right? Both of those reside in Jesus. And it said that Jesus, again, is fully all those things. So the choice was, who would Jesus choose? God or self? And isn't that a silly question when Jesus is all of those things, both of those things? And I'm doing this Lenten practice of reflection on Trevor Hudson's book, 40 Words for 40 Days. And this is the first year I've only posted it on the church one. Usually I post it on both my own. I'm like, why am I doing that? And that same person, me, the one that goes to the grocery store starving and purchases everything in sight, can have one fulfilling meal and it'll be enough, right? Do any of you know what, and I know somebody on Zoom is probably going to answer, but we're just going to pretend that I'm asking it rhetorically. Does anyone know what an amuse-bouche is? Yeah. Come on. Food, yes.
A small little bit of food that is not meant to fill you up, it's just meant to be a taste experience, a little blob of something.
Yeah, the French term is a mouth amuser. I went on a trip of a lifetime with my ministry partner a few years ago, and we ate at this James Beard Award-winning restaurant, Dan Barber's restaurant in Blue Hill in New York City. And I ate the perfect bite. The perfect bite. Like, I was so mouth amused by this bite. It encompassed everything I ever wanted to eat. There was more coming, but I didn't want to eat anything else because it was the perfect bite. We'd walked all over the city. We were inspired by dinner churches, community gardens, and this one bite encompassed everything that trip was supposed to be about. It was God. It was sustainability, because this restaurant does sustainable stuff. It was community, the city, the farmers. David and I trusted the server and the chef to bring us the bite that would give us our vision, a taste of everything. We had everything in that one moment. And I think most of us chase that bite, that moment, that vision everywhere. And I don't think I ever tasted anything like it since or before. I've had one perfect bite of food, I think, my entire life. One bite. In the wilderness, Jesus was tempted by his hunger. His own humanity was screaming at him, feed yourself. The devil asked him to give in, and yet Jesus knew he was cared for like none other. The God that created him, the phrase that is written, one does not live by bread alone, wasn't just a figurative telling off of the devil, right? It was a nod to a fulfillment that a simple meal of bread would not feed the hunger that Jesus was feeling. The hunger that Jesus felt was making room for a radical, earth-shattering love that was selfless and world-altering. His hunger, his feelings of being famished, they made room for something else. They made room for the casting aside of ego and the making room for the return to self with God as divine. The word in Trevor Hudson's book was return. And return to what? Jesus turned to God, but also to his humanity and love for neighbor, being holy both in that moment, right? This wasn't an exercise of his willpower, but exactly the opposite. Jesus was saying, God has me in this moment. Just as I have this call to be wholly human, caring for all of humanity, right? He couldn't turn away from the suffering of all of humankind, even though he was himself suffering for those 40 days, right? What is our biggest temptation right now? What is your biggest temptation right now? I'm not asking you to answer it, right? This is something that I think we've got some pondering to do, right? We've been suffering for God knows how long, right? And then we put a pandemic on top of it. We put wars on top of it. We put poverty on top of it. A media who turn on the news, folks. It's not good news most of the time, right? Now, I can't answer for you, even for us collectively, and given the moment, I can't always answer for myself. But here are a few core temptations I've come up with this week. I think for me, the first one is to look away, right? There is death and suffering, poverty, war, and destruction everywhere we look, right? I talked to some folks with the ministry team and for our region, and they're afraid every one of us is ready to quit. If we look at the healthcare field, nurses are quitting, just so fast. Teachers are quitting. Folks are leaving fields that they're desperately needed because they are burnt out. They also call it compassion fatigue in the healthcare field, right? It can be overwhelming, the suffering that is happening, right? And the need to do self-care and to stay engaged is great, right? But it's imperative that we do that very thing and that we stay engaged, right? In our world, our families, our communities, we are called to be present in the needs of our world as Christians. Second temptation is just to give up, right? Not only to look away, but to just give up. There's this beautiful quote from the Talmud that says, do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. Many of us are exhausted from the diligent work it has taken to even be sitting here in our church, right? We come back, we worship for a little while, and we're like, oh, we gotta go back to Zoom. Oh, in this moment, we didn't get this grant, we didn't get this thing, but we've got to just keep moving forward, right? Oh, we have a mission statement. Oh, what about the vision statement? Oh, there's another thing, right? We have a property meeting, right? We've got these things, we've got choices, right? Here in this moment, our third season of whatever this iteration of COVID-19 is. Friends, this is gospel-centered work, caring for neighbors, showing that God is in fact love. Take a breath, care for yourself, dust yourself up, watch a Netflix show, go photograph some birds, do what you gotta do, right? But we must continue to be diligent. Friends, if you choose to give up something for Lent, if you choose to fast, know that it is God you are letting. I say we don't fast this year, but that's just me, right? I don't think there is a reason to do those things. There is so much that we are giving up just to exist, right? It can only be through the setting aside of self that God can work through us, you, me, making room for love, justice, and peace. But whatever it is that your spirit needs this season, leading up to Holy Week, we need to return to the one that made us and that holds us and that makes room for the divine, but that allows us to return to our humanity and caring for one another, and that our human experience